Dear Marius and members of the family and friends of Judge Willem Heath and Germany, I was going to do half my speech in Afrikaans. I would have had to read the Afrikaans. I mean, I can say, geachte dames en heren, and a little bit more. You know, when Marius informed me that Judge had passed on, I was deeply saddened by that news, as were many of you, members of the family, of course, and friends, colleagues and acquaintances. None more so than Marius himself, who I know loved his father dearly and who courageously looked after him during the most difficult times of his last few weeks and months, when things really, didn't go that well. Speaking as a medical doctor, I know what it's like when you go through that kind of critical stage. But as I often do, and I really like what the Dominee said, this is both a place of God, but also a place of reflection. And I reflected when you gave me the sad news on my personal interactions with Judge Willem Heath. And I had a kind of a smile on my face because I had forgotten, in meeting Judge Heath in recent years and having sort of worked a little bit with him, found him to be an incredibly soft man, despite the public aura, and an incredibly wise man as well. But I'd forgotten about this particular instance. When Nelson Mandela was president, I then recalled, and it was only in that reflection of that moment that this came to me. I've not told Marius about this, but I remember we were at Genadendal, which is the presidential residence in Cape Town, and I was still a medical doctor during those years, and I remember meeting Judge Heath with President Mandela. And it was, I think it was a Sunday afternoon, and there was a braai taking place. And I was a little bit intrigued, I must be frank, about his presence at the time. And I reflected on that, but I reflected on the fact that I had such a warm feeling about him. And I don't think I would be fair to myself if I say I had a long conversation with him. I think it was probably a very short conversation, but I do recall the sense of feeling really, I don't know, almost peaceful with him. And then when I met him again many years later, I really enjoyed that, quiet love that he had, not just for people, but for country. And in my reflection, there was something that Nelson Mandela taught me personally over the years. And that was that the best decisions are made when the heart and the mind is aligned. And I think Judge Heath was emblematic in very many respects, that his heart and his mind was aligned. He had a very good heart, and he had a very sharp mind. But more importantly, Judge Heath was someone that was passionate about the country, the Constitution, integrity, accountability, but he wanted to do it in a constructive way. He was never someone that was destructive. He was someone that really wanted to build the country for all of its people. He was courageous, And like many people that are courageous, often you have those who agree with you and those who disagree with you. That is the nature of life. Not everyone is always going to agree with what you do and what you say. And many are going to disagree with you. But as long as one respects those differences, that is how one builds a community and a country. But in some ways, when I thought about Judge Heath, Marius, when you asked me and honored me, thank you so much for being given the opportunity to pay a small tribute here today. I thought about Julius Caesar, and more specifically, William Shakespeare's Julius Caesar, of course. I thought about, some of them are very young in this audience, so they might not know who Julius Caesar was, but specifically what Mark Antony said. And you will recall, those of you who did Shakespeare, Mark Antony famously said, "Friends, countrymen, Romans, lend me your ears." He then went on to say, "I come here to bury Caesar, not to praise him." The evil that men do often lives after them, and the good that men do is interned in their bones. And he was, of course, addressing Brutus, who, the noble Brutus, as Mark Antony said, who had said things about Caesar, Caesar's ambition, Caesar wanting to be Caesar or king 3 times, thrice as he put it. And Mark Antony was saying, at Caesar's funeral, that Caesar was a good man. He was a good man. And in many ways, of course, we also know that Caesar was betrayed by Brutus, the famous E2 Brutus, the last person to stab him in the back. And in many ways, Judge Heath's life, Willem's life, was very similar to what Mark Antony said about Julius Caesar. He was really speaking about, we often don't remember the good that men do. Being a media owner, I'm as guilty as that, because we often write about the negative, we don't write about the good things that people do. We need to change that. And there was so much good that Willem has done in his life. A man of enormous integrity. Never easy to have both integrity and courage. I can attest to that. I think we must remember Willem, and the family must remember Willem, as a great man, as a wonderful human being, as someone who loved his family. I saw the engagement with Maria, certainly, I didn't have the opportunity to see with others, but someone who loved his community, but someone who also sacrificed a lot for his country. Sometimes he was dealt with harshly by the powers that be. And we live in crazy times. And sometimes people don't make decisions which make sense. And they make decisions that are based on power, and make decisions which are based on things which really shouldn't decide how one should be celebrated. I think Willem, history will be kind to Willem. Be very kind to Willem. I hope somebody takes the opportunity to write his life story, and the good and the bad, or the perceived bad, if you like, so that South Africans could learn, all South Africans, from a great man, a man of integrity, a man of wisdom, and a man of a sharp intellect, who must have been deeply frustrated in the last few months of his life to go through that very difficult period. I will always remember him as a great man, as a wonderful Afrikaner from the community. And because, he was an Afrikaner, I think the best way to pay tribute to him is to actually, rather than read you, refer you to one of the great Afrikaner poets. I don't want to read you, as I was going to do in Afrikaans, his poem, because I think there are quite a few other speakers after me, and time is also of the essence for everyone. But I do want you to, with respect to Judge Willem Heath, is one of the great Afrikaner poets who really believed in the language of Afrikaans. Some of you may know him as C.J. Langenhoven. And he wrote the most beautiful poem. And the poem was called Die Onbekende Weg. In other words, the unknown road. And I just want to tell you a little bit about the poem, but I'm going to leave it to you in your quiet moment to read the poem. And what he was really saying to Judge Heath as we bid him farewell. The road ahead is long. The road behind us is very short. It's baie kort. We can hear people, but we can't really hear them. We can see people, but we can't really see them. When we die, when we go on into the afterlife, so to speak. And it is very lonely. That life is very lonely. The road ahead is very lonely. But what will ultimately carry you, which is what C.J. Langenhoven implied, in that road ahead, is to have lived an absolute life of integrity and to have always had a good heart along the way, because that will carry you into what he referred to as the onbekende weg. So I hope with that, with those few words, I've been able to pay in a small way the tribute to our dear friend, colleague, father, judge, Judge Willem Heath.